Does it say it's live?
It does.
Cool. Wow. All right, friends. It is my pleasure to introduce my sister, Janelle Stauffer, licensed clinical social worker, working, whatever the word you want to use, in Nampa, Idaho. She's going to tell us a little bit about what she does, and she's going to highlight some of the work she's doing right now in the world of trauma therapy, and give us some tips on what she's doing or for us during this time of COVID-19. All right. So without further ado, I hand it over to my beautiful, intelligent sister, Janelle Stauffer. But if you have, you can still jump on and join us on the Zoom call if you'd like. But also you can send us some questions in the Facebook Live. So we'll make sure she gets that. We'll give you an opportunity soon to do Q&A. So go ahead, Janelle. Tell us what's up.
Okay. Well, thank you, Cody. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you on your Sunday Schooled. Like Cody said, I am Janelle Stauffer. I'm Cody's sister. And I am a licensed clinical social worker, and I do private practice therapy, working with all ages from birth all the way to the end of life in resolving trauma. I also do a little bit of teaching at Boise State University here in Boise, where I teach social workers a few things. And I'm also a community advocate. So I am passionate about helping my community of Nampa increase resilience by sharing the stuff I have and learning how we can make it through trauma a little bit better. So that's me in a nutshell. I'm just sitting in my office here today. And I think I get to chat with you a little bit about what trauma is, what it looks like on a collective level, like we are experiencing here with a pandemic. And then the most important part is what we can do to really tend to our nervous systems while we are in this sort of like elbows deep in a traumatic experience together. I think that's what the intention for today is. All right, so I just want to start out by telling you a little bit about trauma. So I'm just going to kind of like give you a surface understanding of how what trauma actually really is. So the first thing to know about trauma is it is a very basic human and really mammalian experience. Our nervous systems are designed to interact with the environment and respond in a way that keeps us moving forward and doing better for the future. And trauma plays a significant role in that. And so we're going to talk specifically about that part of it. We really define trauma as the response humans have within their nervous systems when they experience something that they're not prepared for. So an example I often like to give is going up into the mountains, and if I strap on my hiking boots and go to explore the beautiful scenery in the mountains, and I end up getting chased by a bear, the end result will be trauma. What happens in this scenario is that my nervous system has to do whatever is possible to survive that situation. And really, nobody is prepared for a bear attack, really. I mean, I suppose if we really got into it, there are some people who are prepared, but the general person getting chased, me going up into the mountains, getting chased by a bear, I would not be prepared for. And so my nervous system would have to ignite a protection mechanism that would help me stay safe. And so if I survive that situation, my nervous system does two things there. One, it does what is necessary to keep me safe, fight or flight, usually, sometimes freeze. There's some other defense mechanisms in there, but those two usually. And then at the same time, my brain is making meaning of that experience, hoping that if we do survive, my system does survive, I can go into the future and know how to survive this situation better. So in that way, I carry trauma around with me as a lesson learned well into the future. So this is kind of a genius thing. I mean, the fact that our nervous system has the ability to respond and learn from it is genius. Now there's some little nuances in this that make it a little bit complicated. So for example, I survive the bear chasing. I come back down and I decide to go into the park and play with my kids on the swings. Well, if I just stay with the trauma, if I'm still carrying the trauma around in my nervous system, it's very likely that I'm in the park and I'm also in the park assessing for bears, trying to stay safe from bears in the park, even though it's highly likely that a bear is not going to be present there. But that's the way trauma sort of works. It needs to hold on to the lessons learned and discern highly so that we can be safe. In that way, when we just do it that way, it doesn't really serve us well to be carrying trauma around with us. I'm sort of then wired for fear everywhere I go. And it's bad on my entire body. My nervous system has to stay on high alert, and my body just sort of runs down after a while. Not to mention, I don't have a good time. I'm not present with my kids. It's impacting relationships. What has to happen after I get chased by a bear is I have to have the ability to do two things: discharge the trauma, let my nervous system release it, and then secondly, learn from it in an adaptive way. So for example, an adaptive way of learning from a bear chasing would be that the next time I go hiking, I research bear sightings in the area, and I carry bear spray with me or something like that. So that would be a very adaptive way of meaning to make. Now, discharging, what does that mean? So I want to describe this a little bit because it's going to be really important for the conversation we're going to have about pandemic trauma here in a second. So there's this book out there written by Robert Sapolsky, and it's called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. It's a really great book, and basically it's showing the way that mammals respond to trauma and how they discharge it. And so I'm going to tell you. So if zebras get chased by a lion, and if they survive, the first thing every single zebra will do, you've probably seen it in pictures or somewhere, is they shake their bodies all the way from front to bottom, shake it as a way of discharging trauma or the stress that they just experienced, and then they go lay down and they rest. 100% of the time, every single time they get chased by a lion, that's what every zebra will do. And every mammal has some form of that they need to do, and humans need to do the same exact thing. Now, we have a more complicated nervous system. We do have the basics the same as zebras. Our fight or flight mechanism is the same as zebras, and the need to discharge is similar. But we also have the ability or the need to discharge trauma through what's called co-regulation. So humans are wired to be able to connect up with one another. And when something is more than what we can handle, for example, getting chased by a bear and it's too much for us to regulate, the ability to connect up with another person automatically helps regulate our nervous system. So a good example I like to share is a neuroscientist that I've been learning from over the years. His name is Peter Levine. One day he was walking in New York and he got hit by a car. And so because he understands the nervous system like very well, that's what he's been studying his entire life, he knew that the first thing he needed to do was find some way of co-regulating so that his nervous system could come back into a safe zone. And so a crowd had surrounded him, and he immediately said to the crowd, somebody hold my hand. And so there was a pediatrician in the crowd. And of course, it's the pediatrician. They seem to get this, I think. Reaches out, grabs his hand, and Dr. Levine just brought awareness to that connection and that warmth, and his nervous system regulated immediately. So when EMS got there, he wasn't in shock. His system was in a regulated state. He walked up away and didn't experience any post-traumatic stress at all from that event. It's a perfect example. We are wired for that. We're made when we go through hard things to co-regulate, and that is one way we need to discharge our trauma. And so that's basically trauma in a nutshell. I want to just sum it up. It's a human experience, an ultimate form of learning. And when we go through it, we have to do something that regulates us back to a normal state, or else we will carry the trauma along with us and fear will become part of our life over and over and over again. So let's apply this to a large scale pandemic, which we're in the middle of right now. The pandemic that we're in right now has all the ingredients necessary to trigger a nervous system trauma response. We are right now, as we speak, in the middle of it. It's unexpected for us. It created a significant and quick change that we were unprepared for, and it moved us individually and collectively into a state of protection. We had to. It's genius that we have the ability to do that. So as we speak, that is most likely where the majority of our nervous systems are, on edge a little bit in that. Another part to add to this is that an essential part of this pandemic is a thing that we are calling social distancing. Now you remember, I said a second ago that a key factor in our nervous system's ability to regulate amidst trauma is social connection, right? That means that isolation has the capability to deepen this traumatic experience. So what does that mean for us? For those people who have never had a previous traumatic experience, meaning they aren't carrying trauma around in their nervous system, this experience we're in can create a new single incident trauma experience within people. It can create feelings of hopelessness, despair, fear, and it can be something that will stay in the nervous system and be carried around. For those that have trauma from the past, adding this trauma of uncertainty and isolation can be what we call re-traumatizing. It can remind them of the past trauma that they've experienced, and their nervous systems will go into full protection mode. It can depress their immune system, increase their anxiety, decrease their sleep, and cause feelings of hopelessness and despair. And I just want to say very clearly that it's estimated that about 40% of our population has trauma. And I actually believe it to be higher because there are many things that are not being recorded as trauma that are trauma. But the things that we have recorded through adverse childhood experiences studies and other things like that are about 40%. So it's a high number of our population collectively are in this trauma together, and many of them are being re-traumatized. But I want to be really clear that none of us are immune to the trauma of this experience, whether we've been in a traumatic experience or not. This experience has the capacity to bring our nervous systems into a traumatic state. And so let's talk about what we do with that. I mean, that's kind of a grim thing, and I'm sure we feel it. It feels fearful. There's things all around us. If we go out, we see some strange things like people's face covered with masks, which is already hard for us because we are relational beings and we rely on these transactions like smiles and eye contact and etc. And so a lot of things are happening and it's all over the place. So what we know in the study of trauma is that the best buffer against trauma in a nervous system is this thing called resiliency. So resiliency are things that we things that we've engaged in, or gifts that we've been given through our environment, through our biology, through all kinds of things that are sort of gifts to our nervous system that strengthen it and allow it to better be able to face adversity, and not just face adversity, but face adversity and then make sense of it afterwards. And so you remember I told you before about the bear situation and about that time that if I would go up in the mountains and then come back down to the park, it's possible that I would carry that trauma into the park. Well, there's definite ways to tend to trauma as we're experiencing it so that we don't carry it later into the park, for example. Let's see. The way we tend to, we can do this point in time as we're going through a pandemic by tending to our nervous system, and we can change the trajectory that we have for us. So the trajectory we're on without tending to our nervous system, without paying attention to our psychology, is that we're on a trajectory of fear, and that we would carry fear into the future, and that we might carry it for many years actually into the future. I think a better way to do this would be to change the trajectory in the side of connection. But to do that in the middle of a pandemic, we have to be intentional, and we have to be very clearly taking care of our nervous systems. A friend or a colleague of mine in Colorado wrote this quote the other day. I'm just going to read it out loud. COVID-19 has led many of us around the world to experience feelings of shock and confusion. This collective crisis has disrupted our orientation to the world as we have known it. We have been thrust into a process of self-discovery and a requisite redefining our lives. It is impossible to go back to the old ways of living. She's making a case to move us away from a fear mentality and into what she's calling a collective hero's journey, which I can totally get behind, which means we would face this challenge, this adversity, with a different, instead of with fear, with courage and with curiosity. And that seems to be the difference between post-traumatic stress disorder and post-traumatic growth. So post-traumatic growth is the ability to face something hard and learn important things from it and face it, and then come out without symptoms, without fear, but instead with discernment and confidence and strength. So how do we do this? The first and most important thing is to tend to our nervous system. And I have a couple suggestions about how to do that. The first thing is our basic needs. Our nervous system is a biological process, and it relies upon fuel, food, sleep, and exercise. And so these are things that have been, that in the current situation might be easy to neglect. There seems to be, in some situations, a scarcity around food, or a fear around gaining food. And so it can be hard. And so it's important to just pay attention and eat what is in front of you, healthy food. Fear can interrupt sleep. And so it's important to do the things that are necessary to tend to your sleep. There's things that we call sleep hygiene. So for an hour before bed, you engage in sleep hygiene, which is slowing down your body, engaging in relaxation activities, turning off devices that your eyes see for a full hour before bed, trying not to even read sometimes before bed if it's an issue, and then engaging in anything that brings your body into a relaxed and calm state. So for some, that might be a hot bath, meditation, prayer, connecting with a loved one, anything like that. And those are some basic things of sleep hygiene. And then, of course, exercise, which can be impacted currently. No gyms are open right now. And so, but the body movement and vestibular movement is super important for our nervous system. So that's the basic. But then let's go to the next levels. We are actually wired for play. And so it's really important to get play in every single day. So play is that state of being that's sort of like the deep belly laugh feeling, or like without abandon, just ability to just have fun. And so play is absolutely necessary, and is typically the first thing to go when fear comes in. And so this might be an intentional practice to bring in right now. Playing games with kids, playing board games over Zoom, watching comedy, laughing with a friend, something like that. The next step I've already mentioned, and is extremely, it's pivotal for survival for humans, and that is connection. And so some really hard things are going on right now with connection. Even the words we are using to define the way we're keeping one another safe, social distancing, is really bad for our psyches. It's really terrible. What therapists are trying to reframe is calling it physical distancing with social connection, because even if you pay attention to your body, when you hear the word social distancing, it actually immediately alerts you, and it should, because we are wired to be in relationship, and we're just going to make it better together. And there's two sides to connection that are really important for our health. It's the reciprocity of it. So receiving connection and giving connection. And so it's really important to examine anything that is keeping you from connecting to people and find new ways to do that. One, you reaching out and receiving it, and then you reaching out and giving it. Two different ways, and we need both. We really need both. We have instincts inside of us that are very much in line with this, called tend and befriend. The next really important thing is that our brains thrive in a sense of safety, which might be kind of difficult right now. If you're paying attention to the media at all, or hearing stories, there's a lot of things out there that can trigger feelings of unsafety. And it's true, there is some discernment necessary to pay attention to. But I just want to say we are safe right now for the most part. We are doing things that are keeping us safe, and your brain needs to be looking for that right now. It's important to minimize your exposure to the plethora of traumatic stories related to the pandemic. Just yesterday, I was chatting with somebody, Zoom, of course, and he was feeling so hopeless and downtrodden, and what he had just done right before we talked was listen to comments in response to a news article, and all of them were fear-based and really hard. And he found himself in this really despairing place. And so we had to kind of come out from that and look around at the bigger picture, because what he was experiencing was vicarious trauma, which is the kind of trauma that you get when you are hearing the stories that we tend to hear more in the news, because they want us to be discerning, they want us to pay attention. But there are lots of areas of safety, and your brain really needs it right now. It's really important to get out into nature. It creates this thing that we call in psychology called grounding. Nature has a way of grounding us, which is a kind of a way of saying bringing us into our bodies, bringing us into the present, which is amazing for our nervous systems. The other thing that's important is to feel your feelings. So if you do feel afraid, let yourself feel that. Don't stop it, don't suppress it, feel it, and watch it come all the way through until it makes its way through. That's all emotions do, is they sort of peak and then they come down and they move you forward, every single one of them. So if sadness is there, feel it, move it forward, and just do that with all of your feelings. That's very important. And then if that's within the feelings, if there's anything that you're stuck in, of course, I'm going to say you should probably go chat with a therapist. There are every therapist that I know is doing teletherapy right now. And so it's really more accessible than ever, in my opinion. And I feel like it's important too to hone in on kids right now. I believe they're the most important part of our movement forward, always, in culture. And so the best thing that any of us, any human, can do for kids is tend to our own nervous systems. So by design, kids are designed to take cues from the big people around them. And so if we are okay, if our nervous system is calm and regulated, and they feel that, and they hear it in our voice, and they see it in the softness around our eyes and all that stuff, then they are okay, and they know it. That is the first line, always is right there with kids. If the big people around them are okay, then they are okay. Another really important thing for kids during this time is to engage in relationship activities with kids. In my business, we call those attachment activities. Attachment is just the word we use to describe the relationship that helps them come to be as human beings. So if kids are around parents who are engaged in their life right now, who are playing with them, not 100% of the time. We're not asking for perfect parenting, just present a little bit more. I think that will bring some resilience into kids and allow them to make it through this a little bit better. Of course, kids need play. And so kids need to be engaging in as much play as possible right now. Play is the state in their mind where they are open and receptive and where they get to grow. And so as much play as is possible should happen. Now, don't tell their teachers, but in this moment, play is more important than academics. I actually think they agree with me. Most of them do, but just for the record, play is more important than academics in this time right now. Another thing that's important for kids right now is the ability to express their emotions. That's true all the time, but in times of crisis, when there's a lot of funny things that sometimes even their parents don't know what's going on, they need to be able to do that. A really great way to do this with kids is to just allow them to engage in art. So kids, they have, when kids draw, they are drawing straight from their experiences. And so draw or paint or chalk, whatever form it is, it's a really beautiful way of doing that. And then if parents join in on that, then there's a reciprocity. Parents get to express their emotion as well. Kids get to see parents are taking care of not only their own emotions, but they're there for the kids' emotions. And this is an amazing level of resiliency for kids. Their nervous systems will be like, all right, I got this. We can totally do this. Another important thing that kids need is movement, lots of it. So the science is really clear that their nervous systems get regulated through movement. And so I highly suggest a daily dance party or jumping on the trampoline or moving, just silly moving is really necessary for kids. And then again, if parents join in, then we are tackling a whole bunch of things all at once there. And again, their nervous systems are just soaking it up and saying, I can do this. And then the last thing with kids that they really need right now, and this is one that is sometimes harder when adults are unsure as well, and that is meaning making through storytelling. And what I mean by that is kids right now are they can see just fine. They are taking in the people wearing face masks. They are taking in the stress. They're taking in that school's closed. They're taking in that they can't see their friends, etc. What happens though is that their kids' brains are still developing. And so their meaning making they might struggle with meaning making. They might decide things about these situations that won't serve them for the future. They might decide they're alone or they're unsafe. And so adults need to be putting words to this in constructive ways. For example, when kids are seeing lots of face masks and are curious about it, a parent can say, instead of a fear-based response, a parent can say, that is what we are doing right now to show love to our neighbors. Or when they're feeling lonely and isolated from their friends, it would be an easy decision, or it could accidentally happen for kids to decide that they are alone and isolated, which would be really hard, very traumatic for kids. And what parents can say instead is, I'm here with you. How can we reach out to your friends together? This is a strange situation. I understand. I'm here with you. And what we are doing now is loving one another through this. Let's find ways to connect in other ways. So the ability for parents to make meaning with their kids is actually really important during this time. And so if we do all these things, if parents are taking care of their nervous system, going out in nature, grounding themselves, and then turning around and doing this for kids, we may emerge with post-traumatic growth and maybe change the trajectory in a positive way. And if we don't, there is the threat that we would be turning it in a fear way. So we're in an important place right now collectively in terms of trauma. So that's what I have to say about that, Cody.
All right. Oof, that's a lot of good stuff right there. Okay, I had one person in the Facebook Live who expressed that their anxiety doesn't actually come from I think you kind of hit on this actually, but their anxiety doesn't come from the pandemic itself. It actually comes from the response of leaders,
Mm.
likely political and government leaders, but so it's like they're stressed more about the response that they're seeing. And
Yeah, first I want to say me too, actually. I completely understand that. And I think we're not alone in that at all. And I think that I want to explain first, there's a reason this is like that we unconsciously do this actually, because by design, we sort of the way of things in our culture is we rely upon leaders. We rely upon parents when we're little. We rely upon teachers. I mean, sort of the way of things that we are always looking to the leaders to help us and do this kind of thing. And so it's normal that when we see some wavering or some things that scare us in our leaders, for us to then move into a scared place. And we need to tend to our nervous systems there and make meaning of that. What's happening is an unconscious response, right? Most likely, that's what was happening for me, as I was feeling unprotected. I was feeling unsafe by the leaders at one point in my life or in this process. And what we can do is bring awareness to that what's happening in our nervous system, and sort of breathe into it, and then become conscious about what we do have around us. So for me, I needed to understand that I have choices for myself to protect myself. I wasn't powerless to the decisions of other people. And I needed to get out in nature, and I needed to take care of my nervous system. If I noticed myself getting alarmed because of what's happening and through different conversations, it was just a little flag to me that said, oh, come inside, take care of your nervous system, find your safety, find your grounding. And I think that process needs to happen over and over again. Those little things are just little flags that come up and say, take care of yourself.
One question that I had myself when you were talking about the kind of like the meaning making or storytelling, you talked about that with working with children, but I feel like that's going on beyond just in families. I think so. I'm reading comments that people make about conspiracy theories and things like that, and so I feel like that's a version, but maybe a twisted version of the meaning making and storytelling. How would you go about addressing that? I suppose. I mean, if you see that somebody's having a negative response, how can you helpfully redirect them or whatever towards a more positive response? Or do you just go, they're not gonna, I mean, there's nothing I can do here, they're kind of wandering off?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I first want to say that it's very normal to move towards some form of meaning making. Like I said, our brains want to make meaning so that we are safe for the future, right? So that is happening all the time. So people, that's just what we're all doing. We're all making meaning. And so we do it in our own ways. And when fear is involved without consciousness, it's going to move in a way of paranoia, perhaps, or some things that are not beneficial to us. I will tell you that a sure way to tell whether something is too much or not is the presence of discernment. We are wired to be safe. Our bodies will tell us, and it's through a process of discernment. And discernment has tinges of fear in there. You know, like if I'm walking on the edge of a cliff, my discernment will tell me to move a little bit away from the cliff, right? And that's a little bit of fear in there. But when it's so big that it's no longer discernment and it's now terror, then you know you've moved into something that your nervous system needs help being regulated back into. And so the advice I always give is to, for one another, reframe. First of all, validate that we are all in this together and we're actually all trying to make meaning. That's just what we're doing. And try to find ways, one, to find safety, and two, to reframe meaning making into a more discerning place rather than a terror place. And of course, there are some people who need to stay in their terror place. And if that's where they need to be, we can give them love and compassion in whatever other ways we can. But for ourselves and for those that are closest to us that we can influence, reframing to safety is pivotal. And I'm not saying make up lies. From a discernment place, we probably can actually find safety.
Okay, so I had a question from somebody.
Okay.
whose name is Mark Stauffer.
I know him.
Yeah, the question was, what if your normal pattern of life is more in line already with kind of like social distancing, and socializing creates for you some trauma or anxiety?
Well, so in the current pandemic, do you think that's what he's referring to, is in the current pandemic, socializing causes anxiety, or every day?
I think every day. And so if your recommendation is to build these connections, what if making connections actually is part of the trauma?
Well, and actually there's some truth to that, because the people who have been through really complex trauma, for example, people who have been traumatized in their childhood, a lot of times will make decisions about people, and we'll try to stay away from that. So if it's that kind of people, then they're likely being re-traumatized currently, and their connection has to be different. I mean, to be fair, everybody needs connection, but it needs to be in their safe zone. It has to occur from safety. Now, another thing that he may be touching on is introverts. Introverts, that's a different story. They don't have trauma. They just actually really like, they get energized by being alone. But even introverts need some social connection. There's so many studies on isolation and what it does in the brain. Isolating somebody from other people is actually more traumatic than any other form of trauma out there.
Right, like if you leave a child unattended and just in there, like in orphanages, way back when it would happen, they just kind of leave them, and
right,
it very much stunted their
yeah,
ability to.
it completely impacts their humanness, actually.
Awesome. Okay, let me check and see if there's other questions real quick.
Okay.
I don't see any there. We had quite a few people jumping on. Some could only stay for a minute or two, but we had quite a few viewers going on. So that was pretty cool. Good job.
Well, thanks.
Hey, thanks for doing this for me. A lot of good information, like just speaking as a parent, all the stuff you talked about, connecting with kids there. On occasion we do dance parties. Maybe we should do some more. So
yeah, every day.
Yeah, dance party every day. Love it. Well, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you, Janelle. Any parting shots you want to give? Any little tidbits of wisdom you want to pass on before we end?
Let's see. I don't think I have it. I think I've shared all my wisdom. Truthfully.
Milked it all out. Dropped it all.
I have it all out. But I mean, I will say that the best that there are ways to buffer against trauma here. But it always lives right there in our nervous system. So the best thing you can do is tend to your own nervous system every day.
Awesome. Every day. Even some small act, even a few minutes. Just turning the news off for a little bit.
Exactly. Yeah. And I will say this, you can sort of know it by how you feel. I mean, your nervous system is in your body. And so we're supposed to feel calm and relaxed every moment we're not about to die, like literally about to die. And so if your body goes into this place of tension, it's a sign to you to breathe and take care of yourself and go into that state of calmness, of openness, of receptiveness. If every human lived in that open and receptive place, we might even find world peace.
Whoa, that's big. Okay. One thing you did say, you were talking about, feel your feelings and let them happen. Somebody the other day was telling me, like, they do that, but like they schedule it. Like,
great idea.
Like, okay, I can't feel this right now.
It's a great idea.
I'm gonna feel it in an hour or whatever.
That's a great idea. I love that idea. I mean, I mean, feelings really are here for us in moment by moment interactions, but our culture is set up to where we don't really tend to feelings moment by moment. So if that's the case, schedule them and do them. I love that idea. That's genius.
Okay, it was me. I came up with it. No, I'm just kidding. No, I don't know. All right. Well, thank you so much, Janelle, for joining us. I really appreciate it.